Hey everybody, how are you all doing? It's Wednesday. I don't know why I always say that because you all know. I'm talking, I thought we'd have a conversation right now with Tony Plohetski. Tony is a reporter with the Austin American-Statesman. Tony has been really, hi everyone, Tony has been on top of this story from the get-go, this terrible massacre in Uvalde, Texas. And Tony was the one whose paper decided to publish the videotape, the footage of inside the school. So we're going to have a conversation with Tony. Please feel free to have your questions on hand. And we're going to talk to him about not only sort of the ethical questions involved in releasing this videotape, but also what we've learned about the police response. I don't know if you all have been following it, but the police response was pretty atrocious, to say the least. And let me see if Tony's here. And he's going to talk to us about what we know about the police response and also the ethical issues that Tony dealt with when deciding to release this video. Hi, Tony. How are you?
Hey, Katie, great to see you again and nice to be with you. Thanks for the invite.
Oh, of course, of course. And of course, this video, as you well know, Tony, because you've been in the epicenter, has been one of the dominant stories in the news cycle. And certainly you are know very well that there's been a lot of reaction to the release of this video. And this is something you and your paper decided to do. So let's talk about first and foremost. Well, actually, before we talk about the journalistic decision, I wanted to talk to you, Tony, first about what we've learned from the videotape, because I think there are two stories. And I think the most important story is that what we're learning about the police response. And when you first watched this video, can you tell us what your reaction was? Because you've been covering the story from the very beginning.
Was out there that very first day, Katie. So I was allowed to watch the video several weeks ago, and that was something that we had reported on. You may recall that we were able to share with the public a screen grab from inside that school that was taken at 11:52 in the morning. Keep in mind that the gunman entered that school at 11:33. And so by 11:52, I think the reason that screen grab was so wrenching to so many people is that we saw officers with assault rifles and at least one ballistic shield. And so that intensified questions about why police did not act sooner and more aggressively.
You know, it took them nearly 70 minutes, I understand, and please correct me, Tony, if I'm wrong,
No, that's right.
to breach the classroom. And, you know, personally, one of the things that I found super upsetting, and I guess and maybe I shouldn't be judgmental about this, but there seemed to be this weird cavalier atmosphere outside this classroom where one of the officers was using like hand sanitizer. Somebody else was fist bumping each other. Can you tell me sort of what you learned from the video in terms of the activity that was going on and the sense of urgency that these officers felt or did not feel?
Well, what we know, Katie, is that within about 3 minutes after the gunman had entered the school and entered that classroom, and for people who maybe have not seen the video or don't want to, I just want to describe those few moments. I think one of the things that is so striking about this video is that we see a man with an AR-15 walk down the hall of an elementary school in our country uninterrupted. We see and hear him open fire. And then about 3 minutes later, we do see a number of local police officers arrive at the scene. And they do exactly what experts say they are supposed to do. They run toward the gunfire. There is an exchange of gunfire, and you actually see the officers get blown back by the gunfire. And I think in the minds of experts who have viewed this video and know the information, that's really where the problem starts. Because after that, there seemed to be no real concerted effort to regroup or to strategize and to move in. And what experts say is, you know, when you're faced with a situation like that, you must do anything urgently. You do not have time to spare. You have no seconds to waste.
Yeah, if anyone has questions, you can submit them. People don't really like the comments covering Tony's face. And just for anybody who may be just joining us, I'm talking to Tony Plohetski. Am I pronouncing your name correctly, Tony?
Plohetski. Yeah, Plohetski.
We've texted, of course, a lot. And one of the things I wanted to ask you about is, well, there's so many things, but I thought there was an opportunity when the shooter was entering the classroom. There were two police officers outside of the school. They had an opportunity. Oh, by the way, and Tony's a reporter with the Austin American-Statesman, and Tony's newspaper is the one that released the footage along with this. You also work for the ABC.
That's right. That's right. Jointly with the local ABC station here. Yes, yeah. KView.
So, but what happened before the gunman entered the school itself? Because two policemen were called, or they saw him. Why didn't they exchange fire at that moment before he was able to enter the school? Of course, there are all these, what woulda, woulda, coulda, shoulda, but you do wonder, God, if they had only been able to stop him before he even got into that school.
And Katie, the answer to that question, frankly, is still a little murky. We saw a report come out last week by national experts who are trained in, who conduct training in stopping active shooters. And according to their report, which was based on evidence they had reviewed from the investigation, one of the local police officers apparently, according to that report, was waiting on permission from a supervisor to open fire, but also apparently stated that he was unclear whether or not he could open fire without possibly injuring one of the children inside the school. Subsequent to that, we've gotten information that that may not have been accurate, that his statement may have changed. So unfortunately, as we sit here right now, the truth about what happened before the gunman entered the school is unclear. But Katie, I also think that that is the reason this hallway video is so important. It does tell a story. It is an unabridged version of the truth. Mind you, it's from one vantage point, but by looking at the video, we don't find ourselves sorting through what happened based on statements from officers who were at the scene.
I've heard so many different stories as this has developed. Initially, Tony, as you know, when Greg Abbott gave that press conference, they praised the police response. And that story has unraveled and taken various twists and turns ever since this shooting took place. And I'm confused because early on, there was one story about they were waiting for a key to get into the classroom. And I later heard the classroom wasn't even locked. So can you please shed some light? What exactly, to the best of your knowledge, and I know there is an investigation underway, and who knows how honest that will be, but can you tell us why it took them so long to go into the building? Was it just fear of this gunman? I mean, what the hell happened?
So with regard to the key, there was an apparent mistaken belief that the classroom was locked. There is now the belief that it was not. What's striking even still, locked versus not locked, we know that the police had appropriate tools to breach the door in that moment. And so there were calls for keys, there were master keys, they were comparing keys, they were trying to reach a janitor for a master key.
They were waiting for a janitor. I mean, what?
Yeah.
So, I know that the Texas Border Patrol, correct me if I'm wrong, brought in a shield that they ultimately used to breach the classroom to protect the officer. Were they waiting for that shield?
There,
And of course, go ahead.
well, that's one of the things that I think is so maddening to people who have watched this video, is that over the course of an hour, you see more and more firepower, more and more protective equipment. At one point, an officer even brings in tear gas canisters and sets them down. And so all of that is happening in this hour. Again, it stands in such contrast to the urgency that we now know was unfolding inside that classroom. A couple of other things, Katie, that I think are very relevant points is that during that hour, we know there was additional gunfire from inside the classroom, and we know that people were calling 911 begging for help.
And so, do we have any timeline? This is very gruesome, but certainly important and germane when discussing the police response, Tony. Do we have any timeline in terms of when the majority of children and those two teachers were killed, when this man was holed up in the classroom?
That's actually still part of the investigation, and they're consulting with medical experts to try to determine, if it can be determined, the extent of the injuries and whether or not any of the victims may have survived had they gotten faster medical attention. But we know that one of the teachers called her husband, one of the teachers who did not survive, called her husband and said, I've been shot. And so for that moment, clearly she was still alive, and we know that she did not survive.
And I read a heartbreaking account of another teacher in the school just saying that we kept waiting for people to come. Let's talk about your decision to release this videotape. Extremely controversial. You've been highly criticized as your paper and the TV station for whom you work. You all decided to make this videotape available to the public. Tell me a little bit about the decision process you went through and why you ultimately chose to release it.
I want to be very clear with people that this was a very, very difficult decision. It was not something that we took lightly. But as journalists from day one, we have been calling for transparency about what happened in that day. And that call for transparency has also come similarly from the citizens of Uvalde and also from the family members who lost children or other loved ones that day. So as journalists, we've been consistently trying to seek information. We have collectively, among all media outlets or many media outlets and parent companies in Texas, requested information jointly. And so far, officials have simply not released information, precious little information. And so there have been those calls, but also in addition to that as well, there have just been so many contradictory statements that have been made. Really from day one, as you point out, Katie, there was this narrative on the second day by the governor that had police not performed heroically, the loss of life would have been greater. So we found ourselves in this situation where we had the video and have to really consider what is the public interest and what is the right thing to do here. certainly, as you mentioned, we have faced criticism, but I also want to say, and maybe this is not being as amplified as much, we also have heard from people who are thankful that we were able to provide some element of truth to them as well.
I think the most of the criticism has come, Tony, because of the family members who have obviously gone through extraordinary trauma, who have said, like Gloria Cesaris, whose daughter was among the 19 children killed. She said on Facebook, "This is the opposite of what the families wanted. Our hearts are shattered all over again." And I know that the parents were scheduled on Sunday to have a chance to watch this video, to process it. And I think that is the major criticism as far as everything that I've read, Tony, that it was just sort of a very insensitive thing to do to the families. Talk about how you weighed that and what efforts you made, because I know you told me before we got on this Instagram that you had made a very good faith effort to get in touch with the families, but some, in all honesty, have said, we never heard from, the paper,
Yeah.
we never heard the station. So can you sort of describe the efforts that you made?
Well, as a company, we reached out to family members whose contact information we have, who have previously spoken to us. I want to also say that we did, in fact, reach some family members, and one of the requests that we heard, in fact, was that we edit the screams from the video. And so after much consideration, we did, in fact, comply with that request as well. Candidly, Katie, we've gotten criticism for that too, that no, this needs to be an wholly unedited version of the truth of what happened.
There's a lot of conversation about sort of sanitizing these shootings, and in a way protecting the public from the horror of the event. And there's a school of thought to wake up the country that some of this coverage should actually be more graphic. I'm not coming down on either side, but that's certainly been a conversation. Well, Tony, how many of the families were you able to talk to, and did any of them urge you not to release the footage other than move the screams?
Yeah, one of the things that is striking to me, kind of based on the conversation we're hearing today, is that families have resoundingly, many of them at least, maybe not resoundingly, but many of them have said, we want to know. We really do want to know. And we don't trust the government to give us the full truth. And so when we talk about this meeting on Sunday, it was going to be held by a lawmaker who I think in many circles here in Texas is held in high esteem, but there's still an element of distrust among the government and among politicians. And so that was also one of our considerations as well. Do we hold back and let them, let politicians and state officials who in many circles and among many families in Texas are not trusted right now,
or have a vested interest in framing the story a certain way, or covering their own asses, or whatever it is their motivation might be. And I think it's important for everyone to know, whether they agree with the decision or not, that the authorities in Uvalde and in Texas writ large, and Austin, have not been particularly transparent or forthcoming with information that would help piece together the police response. Is that an accurate statement, Tony?
I think it is. I mean, the reality is that this piece of information is 7 weeks old, and there has been time, at least in the minds of many people, for law enforcement to have previously met with some of the family members or released this information. But I just want to be very clear that as we went about this, our mindset was that our hope was that we were doing something in the interest of public service and in the interest of common good. This was not a race to get this out the door. I know it's hard to explain to people all of the deliberations and all of the considerations. And candidly, we knew that this would be met with controversy. Katie, I also want to say one other point that is really important to me personally, and that is, could I live with myself knowing that there is such a demand for clarity and information? Could I live with myself with just having this hanging out, on my desk for a week and not bringing the information to the public? I mean, as journalists, I think our job and our duty and obligation is to share information with the public. Of course, there is a balance with further traumatizing victims' families. It is a very, very, very tough call and a very tough decision.
So the scene in the newsroom was with, I would imagine, all the leaders of both organizations,
Yeah.
the news and the television station. And were you able to consult any journalist sort of ethicists to talk about kind of the public's right to know versus protecting the families of the dead?
Yes. And ultimately, we all reached the same consensus, and that is this is a very, very difficult decision. But our obligation to the public is to report, and our duty is to err on the side of reporting. That's what we do as journalists. We don't wait for government to do the right thing. And I know I can appreciate that the right thing is up for debate and can be challenged. But at the end of the day, our obligation is to share information as prudently as we can when we have it.
Also, just to kind of clarify, Greg Abbott, the governor of Texas, and the Uvalde mayor both, excuse me, called for the release of the footage, but the county DA opposed the release. So it was kind of a political hot potato from the get-go, wasn't it? And it just shows there are a lot of different agendas at work here. When all is said and done, Tony, and if you all are just joining me, I'm talking to Tony Plohetski, who is with the Austin American-Statesman. By the way, we're getting different comments. One person wanted to know why you didn't just keep the audio altogether out of it. I guess the gunshots as well as the screams. And was there a consideration to just have the video without any audio?
We considered everything, really, Katie, every moment. Do we, and this is an important distinction as well. It is my understanding that the video that is to be shown on Sunday to family members will only depict the law enforcement response. So
Yeah.
one of the questions that we wrestled with and grappled with was whether or not we should, the benefit of, or whether or not we should show the gunman actually entering the school. And I think that one of the main decisions there was that. But at the same time, again, going back to the idea that if we're going to tell people what happened, we need to give a full account. And if we are to understand the carnage of that violent day, the story actually does not start with the law enforcement response. The story starts with the gunman walking into that school.
We're getting a lot of different comments and questions in the question section of this conversation. I just want to read them quickly before I let you go to continue your really great reporting, Tony. Many people are asking why the video was released without the family seeing it. But here's some other comments. No question, just let him know his investigative integrity is a big win for us Austinites. Another person said it needs to be seen before and Abbott create a different story. That's sort of to your point. And a lot of people, are, as I said, saying it was respectful to the families. Hold on 2 seconds. Sorry. And then there are people saying, what will be the ramifications of this police not doing anything just for 70 minutes? I mean, it was counter to everything they were trained to do. So I guess the question is, is anything, or will the police officers on the scene be held accountable? And, somebody asked, will charges be brought against them? I mean, I know that it's hard to sue police officers, but I read that civil suits are definitely likely to be, filed against the police.
That's absolutely right. And there are still investigations going on into the police response and the overall activity of that day. I think it remains to be seen if there will be criminal charges. I'll tell you that legal experts I've talked to, spoken with here in Texas, who know the landscape of Texas law, tend to think there will likely not be criminal charges. But one thing too, Katie, that I want to point out about the video is that while it does tell an incredibly important story about the response, one question that it does not answer is the why. And that is, what information did those officers have in those moments? And what direction were they being given or not? And much of that will come from officer statements that are still being collected right now.
And it sounds as if, at least from everything I've gleaned, is that nobody was really in charge. The chain of command totally broke down. There was nobody instructing these officers. I guess there were some school police officers, there were some community police officers from Uvalde, then the Texas Border Patrol. So it seems like that there was no chain of command that was really operating that day, which perhaps also contributed to this lack of response. But it's absolutely maddening to me that they had just had a training exercise, right? 2 months earlier, as far as I could understand. Mm-hmm. And after Columbine, authorities learned that they have to breach a classroom stat. They have to get in there right away. And I think it's maddening to see, as I mentioned, the guy pumping hand sanitizer out, or somebody pumping another officer, when all these children are inside the classroom and their teachers, some of them desperately calling 911. It honestly defies all logic to me.
I think that sentiment is shared widely among anyone who knows anything about what happened that day. I also think that we will continue to learn more in coming days and coming weeks, coming months. But one question that people have also asked me is whether or not the truth will really ever be known. And I hope for the families of the victims and the people of Uvalde, the truth will be known. But Katie, I think as time goes on, we're seeing that the truth is incredibly hard to bear.
Well, I was going to say, I think it would be so maddening to learn what sounds like just complete and utter incompetence by the police for the families. If I was a family member, I think it would add to my tremendous pain. But you're right, in terms of, I think every American citizen needs to understand what the response is. And it certainly does lend a lot of credence to this idea that the best way to deal with a bad man with a gun is a good man with a gun, even when they're trained police officers. And so the investigation continues. You said you don't know if the truth will ever be available to the public, or what actually happened. When do you expect sort of a full report or an investigation to be complete? And can you trust the people who are doing the investigating?
Think that that is the question that many people are asking. We know on Sunday that this House committee, Texas House Committee, is going to be presenting some information to the community of Uvalde and the family members. I think the law enforcement investigation, though, is taking some time. And we shouldn't forget that there is a federal investigation going on as well, but that is more of an after-action type investigation to help law enforcement better train for these types of situations in the future.
Well, Tony Plohetski from the Austin American-Statesman, you've been doing some fantastic reporting.
Thank you.
Covering the story. It must be grueling. I know it was a really difficult decision, and it's not easy being at the epicenter of criticism for the decision you made. But, thank you for talking to us about it. I think people need to hear kind of what goes into the decision-making process when you have powerful material like this, and how you have to balance the public's right to know with the feelings of the family. And I hope that the family you weren't able to reach, Tony, that you'll be reaching out to them on an ongoing basis and hearing what they have to say, and certainly maybe explaining your decision to them. But I'm sure they are still in a great deal of pain. Gosh, almost 2 months. Not really 2 months, but I guess
7 weeks yesterday. Yeah.
7 weeks yesterday. Anyway, Tony, thank you so much. And let's stay in touch as this story continues to develop. Thank you, everyone, for being with both of us today. We appreciate it.
Thank you, Katie.
Okay, take care.
You too.